It's a beautiful Saturday morning in late spring and the herbs are perfect for picking. They are full and lush. This is the perfect time of year for that. So come along with me as I pick many of my herbs. Some I will be dehydrating, some I will be hang drying. I'll kind of share with you that as I go. But first we're going to start out with parsley. I've got 2 parsley plants here in the front of this raised bed. These were not supposed to be parsley. They were supposed to be celery, but I got the seeds mixed up when I was indoor seed starting. It's amazing how similar parsley and celery look when they're really young. I'm going to be cutting this back a lot. This will give me a lot of parsley to work with. I'll be using this for dried parsley throughout the year. And I'll be leaving just a little bit, but I'm going to cut it back quite a bit. In between these 2 parsley plants, I have an eggplant that isn't doing so great. It's had a lot of damage from flea beetles. And what I'm hoping to do is by cutting these parsley plants back, I'm on the south side right now, so it's going to get full sun from the south. This cosmos is not going to be a problem because the cosmos is on the north side of this eggplant. But I'm hoping by cutting this back, the eggplant can get even more sun and hopefully rebound from all the damage of flea beetles it's gotten. But you can just kind of see how I'm cutting this from the outside in. That way I can leave it to regrow from the center throughout the season. And if it doesn't regrow, hey, I didn't expect this to be parsley anyway, so it's not like I'm depending on it, but I'm leaving just the center. And hopefully this will open all of this up. Oh, it smells so good. It's amazing. It's amazing how fragrant fresh herbs are when you're growing them yourself. I can just, oh man, it smells amazing. Okay, that opens up this side for the eggplant. And now let's go to the one on this side. Next, I'm going to go to my greenstock where I have the parsley I intended on planting. It actually isn't as strong as what I've planted in this raised bed, but I still want to go ahead and get it trimmed. One of them I noticed was starting to form a flower this first year, which isn't really normal. I've only had that happen once. So I'm going to cut that in the center, hoping that maybe it'll help that plant continue to regrow for just the leaves itself. So that's the center that looks like it's starting to try to go to flower. You can tell it's just a little more pungent, but not bad. So I cut that off. And for this one, I'm going to trim off some of the weaker leaves and then some of the stronger ones. And then just maybe leave a little bit more than usual just so it can maybe continue to regrow that way. Like that one's trying to develop a seed also. Cut that off. This one's looking good. So I'm going to cut off the yellowing parts. I think I may have not been so diligent with the watering here, which is probably why it's reacting this way. This is very not typical of parsley. I'm going to leave the rest of this in case I need fresh parsley. Then I have plenty of leaves left over when I'm cooking. The next step for all of this parsley is to go into the dehydrator. Honestly, sometimes I wash it and dry it, sometimes I don't. If we've just gotten a rain, I won't. But since some of this parsley was in that raised bed next to the soil, I think I'm going to give it a quick rinse, lay it out on towels, let them dry, and then I will pop them in the dehydrator just the way they are. I will a lot of times just snip it off here at the stem, so I'm not dehydrating the stem, but I'm just dehydrating the leaves. And then once those are dry, then I'll put them through a mortar and pestle and then put them in a spice jar for use the rest of the season. All right, let's go on to our next herb. The next thing I'm going to harvest is oregano. I'm a little late on this because some of these leaves are starting to form what will eventually be the flower, and the best quality oregano is before that starts to happen, but better late than never. It's really not that bad, but I'm going to go ahead and harvest this oregano, and I'm not going to cut all the way down, partly because I don't want to stress the plant too much, but partly because I still want to be able to have fresh oregano. And basically I'm just going to give it a haircut. I say I don't want to stress the plant. I've never been able to kill oregano. I've had this same plant for years, so I don't really think I could do anything to truly hurt it. All right, I'm going to be doing the same thing in the kitchen. Going to rinse this oregano off, lay it out to dry, and then I'll put it in the dehydrator. I just cut myself when I was harvesting the oregano, which is not that uncommon. Sadly, it happens a lot. And I'm just going to show you what I'm doing. Now, this is not medical advice. Like, I haven't had first aid since I was in college, but so many of you guys have asked me how to use or grow medicinal herbs. And I'll just tell you one thing that I've been using for many years with minor cuts like this. Of course, I'm going to try to stop the bleeding as much as I can. It's very, very small, no major thing. But I use yarrow, and yarrow is an easy to grow, in my climate, perennial, and it's really beautiful. But a couple of years ago, I guess, I harvested both the leaves and the flowers and I dried them. So I have it here in a jar. And all that I do is, especially if it doesn't stop bleeding right away, is I just put the yarrow directly on the wound, and within a couple of minutes or so, usually, depending on how bad the cut actually is, the bleeding will generally stop. And again, not medical advice. Obviously, check any kind of counter indications if you ever do this. Depending on what plant family yarrow is in and what you might have allergies to, you may have issues. But with my family, all I have to do is put that on there and it usually stops. Typically, I will eventually, wash it out, put a bandage on it of some sort. But usually it's a pretty quick and easy way for me to get the bleeding to stop. Look at that, a little syrphid fly's hanging out. I wonder if it senses the yarrow. I don't know. But what was bleeding where I couldn't stop it, now no sign of it. So that's just an easy way to use the plants in my garden, and it's just something that I use all the time. Another thing that I'm doing right now is I can feel that I'm trying to get sick. All 3 other members of my family have been sick this last week or 2, and I'm just feeling run down. I've been taking echinacea tincture pretty much every hour or 2 for the last couple of days. So far I haven't had any symptoms except just feeling run down, compared, like, my other members of the family had all sorts of different symptoms. But behind me is echinacea that's trying to come back, and that's something that I try to harvest every year to the roots and the flowers, and I'll tincture it. You can find instructions on doing that online, but that's something that I found it's also been really helpful in supporting me, especially this time of year when I really want to get out here and enjoy my garden. It's absolutely beautiful. I don't want to be sick right now. Like, if I'm going to be sick, let it be the middle of the winter or the heat of the summer, but not in the spring. So hopefully that echinacea will continue working and I'll continue being able to do light things. Obviously, I want to support my body. I don't want to be working in the garden, but also I feel like just being out here in the beautiful sunlight morning, and I'm not doing a whole lot of really anything except just harvesting. I think that's also very supportive to my body, trying to hopefully fight off whatever my whole family has had this week. The next herb I'm going to harvest is basil. Now, basil really isn't in its full glory right now, but the basil plant that I'm going to harvest from is actually one that I started from seed in my arrow garden over the winter. And then once it outgrew the arrow garden, I transplanted it into a grow bag, kept it in my greenhouse for a little while. And now it's a very mature basil plant. I've already harvested a lot from it the last week or so for basil pesto and pizza, but I found out this week that I have run out of my dried basil. So I want to go ahead and harvest it, and that way I can get some basil dried before it gets too busy in the summer. So that's what I'm going to be doing with some basil in my grow bag next. Here's my grow bag of basil. And again, it's been growing all winter. That's why if you prune basil properly, you can get basil for a really long time, as long as you keep it from going to flower. And I'm going to prune this pretty heavily just because basil this time of year will grow really, really fast. And this will make sure that yarrow's doing its job. Yep, still good. Basil will provide a lot throughout the year. So my main thing when I'm cutting here is I'm just wanting to make sure that there are new shoots below my cut. So if I'm cutting right there, you can just see a couple of leaves already forming. So this will continue to grow. Okay, I think that's good enough. And this will definitely continue regrowing. I have one more I may want to go ahead and prune. This is a new variety called Basil Everleaf, and it's supposed to not go to flower as quickly, or if not at all. I've never tried it before. And this is when I started from seed this year. And I think I'm just going to prune it, not necessarily so that I can get the basil from it, but because I'd like it to grow a little bit more bushy. So it's great now, it's growing just tall. And I think I'm just going to cut it back about a third, maybe a halfway. And then hopefully it'll just regrow from the sides. Curious how it compares to this other kind, which is just a regular Italian basil. Very similar. I don't know that I can truly tell a huge difference. But now this one will be able to continue to grow. And I have lots of other basil in my garden. Some basil I plant to let to go to flower so that the bees can have something, especially during the middle of the summer. But some basil I like to keep pruned so I can continue harvesting all year. But that basil in the beds that I have right now is not ready to prune or pick, but this will give me enough to get me started on my dried basil for the kitchen. I'm back on another Saturday morning. This time I'm going to be harvesting peppermint and a couple of other herbs to last me all year. Peppermint I will dry in the dehydrator and then use it all season, mainly for teas and such. It's probably my only tea that I really enjoy. Chamomile would be a close second, but I'm going to go ahead and start harvesting that so I can get it ready for year-round use. You really can't do anything to harm the plant itself, but because I still like to have it fresh, especially in the summertime, I like to add a sprig to ice water. It's so refreshing. I'm not cutting them all the way down to the ground, even though they would grow back, because I just want to mainly have enough to be able to dry, and then I can enjoy the rest of it all summer. Just like other herbs, morning is a great time to harvest. We also got a really good rain last night, so it should have had some growth, and I can already smell it. I love peppermint. All right, I think that's enough. It at least gives plenty of peppermint to continue to harvest from and use, and then this should be plenty to be able to dry for the rest of the season. The next thing I'm going to do is harvest some lemon balm. I just checked and I still have a decent amount of lemon balm. I think I've got about a half of a pint, which should be plenty, but I like to go ahead and top off what I have, so I'm going to harvest that next. I love the smell of lemon balm. So calming. I harvest it the same way that I harvest peppermint. They are in the same family. You can tell a huge similarity between the leaves in general. Just doing a little bit of a trim here. Another thing I did this morning was I cut my cilantro microgreens that I had been growing honestly a little bit too long. They should have been cut before, but I'd started them because my cilantro was already starting to bolt, and I know coming up on salsa season and all things grilling, and I like to use cilantro in marinades, I wanted to have some ready to go. So I got that cut, put in the freezer in a bag. I am going to start another round of cilantro microgreens just because I really liked them, and then hopefully by the time they start to grow, we'll have fresh tomatoes and I'll be able to use it fresh, but at least I'll have a stash in the freezer to be able to use when I don't have the fresh cilantro. Next, I'm going to be harvesting just a little bit of rosemary. My rosemary is young. I just planted it this spring, but I just realized that I ran out of Italian seasoning, and I make my own Italian seasoning out of the herbs that I grow. I'm going to get just enough rosemary to hopefully tide me over for a little while with a homemade Italian seasoning mix, but then leave enough on the plant so that it can continue growing throughout the season and then harvest again a little bit later. The last thing I'm going to harvest this morning are some elderflowers. I like to have these on hand for medicinal remedies throughout the year. I don't use them a ton, but when I do decide to use them, it's nice to have them on hand, and I just checked this morning, I'm completely out. I'm a little bit late on doing this just because the flowers have already been in peak bloom for a while, and now they're starting to develop elderberries, which I have plenty of, so I probably should have harvested all the flowers, but I have a few flower clusters left over, so I'm going to go ahead and harvest them for my stash. I can't remember how long I've had these elderberry bushes. This is the strongest one. One ended up dying, and then I have another one that's a little bit weaker, but I think I've had them for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years or so, and I've harvested so many elderberries off of them. I've got plenty of them in my freezer. This is fun. So the elderflowers are what I've found I need a little bit more of. It rained a lot, so I've got water splashing on me as I do this. Last year I did try elderflower fritters, where you batter the flowers and you fry them. Was not a huge fan. They're so sweet, so it's kind of a weird, like sweet, savory. Wasn't a huge fan, so I'm just gonna dehydrate these and save them for teas when I need them. Over these last 2 Saturdays, I've been able to harvest most of the herbs that I will end up drying for use throughout the year, especially into the winter, but many of these I'll continue to be able to use fresh throughout the year. That's one reason I didn't harvest the herbs like sage and thyme, because I can use them, and I can even harvest them again once more before winter sets in. But for now, this will conclude this year's harvesting to dry and preserve herbs to last year-round. I hope you've been able to gain some tips and insights and ideas on how you can do this in your own garden. It certainly is something that you will be glad you did once the winter comes around and you've got homegrown herbs in your cabinet ready to use.